The history of the United States is a powerful story of revolution, transformation, and resilience. From its birth through rebellion to becoming one of the world's most influential nations, America's journey is filled with triumphs, trials, and turning points that have shaped not only its own future, but also the destiny of the world. Whether you're a student, a curious mind, or someone seeking to understand the roots of modern America, this topic uncovers the key events, people, and ideas that built a nation. Dive in to explore how history was written, and why it still matters today. The story of the United States begins long before the nation itself was officially founded. In the early 1006, hundreds European powers, particularly Great Britain, Spain, and France, began establishing colonies in North America. These colonial ventures were driven by a mixture of economic ambitions, religious motives, and a desire for territorial expansion. Among them, the British colonies along the eastern seaboard would become the foundation for what would later become the United States. By the mid-1007, 13 British colonies had been established from Massachusetts in the north to Georgia in the south. These colonies were diverse in culture, economy, and population. New England was known for its Puritan roots, small farming communities, and maritime industries. The middle colonies, like Pennsylvania and New York, were more religiously tolerant and economically mixed. The southern colonies were largely agrarian, relying heavily on enslaved labor to grow cash crops such as tobacco, rice, and indigo. Though politically subject to British rule, the colonies developed a strong sense of identity and autonomy. Each colony had its own government, laws, and tax systems, and many colonists began to see themselves as something distinct from their counterparts in Britain. After gaining independence from Britain in 1783 through the Treaty of Paris, the United States faced a critical question: how should the new nation be governed? Initially, the 13 states operated under the Articles of Confederation, a loose agreement that gave most powers to individual states and very limited authority to a central government. While this model preserved the independence each state cherished, it quickly proved ineffective. There was no power to tax, no national court system, and no strong leadership to manage trade, diplomacy, or internal conflicts. By the mid-1780s, it became clear that the country needed a stronger and more unified framework. In 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 states Rhode Island did not attend met in Philadelphia for what became the Constitutional Convention. Though originally intended to revise the Articles of Confederation, the delegates instead decided to draft an entirely new document, the United States Constitution. This document created a federal system of government, meaning power would be shared between the national government and the states. It also introduced a system of checks and balances, dividing the government into 3 branches: legislative branch Congress to make laws, executive branch President to enforce laws, judicial branch Supreme Court, and other federal courts to interpret laws. This structure was carefully designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. For example, the President can veto laws passed by Congress, but Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 vote. The Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional, but judges are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Another major innovation was the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, added in 1791. These amendments guaranteed essential freedoms such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, the right to a fair trial, and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Bill of Rights was crucial in gaining support from states and citizens who feared a strong central government might abuse its power, just as the British monarchy had done. The U.S. Constitution has proven to be a remarkably durable document. It is the oldest written national constitution still in use today and has served as a model for democracies around the world. Its ability to be amended has allowed it to evolve with the times. For instance, amendments have abolished slavery, extended voting rights, and limited presidential terms. The Constitution not only established how the government operates, but it also embedded the principle that the authority of government comes from the people, a revolutionary idea in an age dominated by monarchies and empires. The famous opening words, "We the people," declared that the power of the government is granted by the citizens, not inherited or divinely ordained. The ratification process itself was intense and divisive. Supporters of the Constitution, known as Federalists, argued that a strong central government was necessary for national stability and unity. Opponents, known as Anti-Federalists, worried about losing state sovereignty and individual freedoms. The compromise between the two sides resulted in the addition of the Bill of Rights and helped ensure the Constitution's eventual adoption. In conclusion, the creation and adoption of the U.S. Constitution marked a turning point in the nation's history. It laid the groundwork for a stable government, introduced a pioneering democratic framework, and enshrined values that continue to guide American society today. The Constitution's success lies in its balance between power and freedom, between flexibility and structure, and most importantly, between the people and their government. Following its independence, the United States embarked on an ambitious path of territorial expansion. Fueled by the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that Americans were divinely destined to expand across the North American continent, the country rapidly grew in size, population, and influence. But this expansion came with significant costs: displacement of Native American populations, tensions with foreign powers, and most notably, a growing divide over the issue of slavery. These tensions ultimately culminated in the nation's bloodiest conflict, the American Civil War. Territorial growth and manifest destiny in the early 19th century, the U.S. expanded its borders through land purchases, wars, and treaties. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, negotiated by President Thomas Jefferson, doubled the size of the country. Soon after, explorers like Lewis and Clark charted the vast western lands, inspiring more Americans to settle in the frontier. Further acquisitions included Florida from Spain 1008, 119 Texas, which had won independence from Mexico and was annexed by the U.S. In 1845, the Oregon Territory through negotiation with Britain in 1846, the Mexican Cession after the Mexican-American War in 1848, which added California, Arizona, New Mexico, and other southwestern lands, while these expansions helped shape the continental U.S. As we know it today, they also raised critical questions. Would these new territories allow slavery? Who had the power to decide? Congress or the states? Sectional tensions and the question of slavery as the U.S. expanded westward, the issue of slavery became increasingly divisive. The Southern economy was deeply tied to slave labor, especially in the cultivation of cotton and tobacco. In contrast, the northern states were moving toward industrialization and had largely abolished slavery. To maintain balance in Congress, compromises were made, such as the Missouri Compromise 1820 and the Compromise of 1850, to keep the number of free and slave states equal, but these efforts were temporary fixes. The 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed new territories to decide the slavery issue by popular vote, led to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. At the heart of the conflict was the fundamental question: could a nation founded on liberty continue to exist while enslaving millions? Influential abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and William Lloyd Garrison raised national awareness and moral opposition to slavery. The Civil War 1861-18, 165 and 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on a platform opposing the spread of slavery into new territories. In response, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America, arguing for states' rights and the preservation of their way of life, which included slavery. The Civil War began in April 1861 when Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. What followed was 4 years of brutal warfare, with battles like Gettysburg, Antietam, and Shiloh marking high points in a conflict that would claim over 600 lives. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared all slaves in Confederate, held territories to be free, shifted the war's purpose from preserving the Union to also ending slavery. The war ended in 1865 with the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse, and shortly thereafter, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution formally abolished slavery. Aftermath and legacy: though the Union was preserved and slavery was abolished, the Civil War left deep scars. The Southern economy was devastated, and the nation entered a difficult period known as Reconstruction, in which efforts were made to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society. The Civil War remains a defining moment in U.S. history, a test of its founding ideals and a turning point in the nation's identity. It resolved, at great cost, the contradiction between liberty and slavery, but left enduring issues of race, equality, and regional division that still shape the U.S. today. Following the Civil War, the United States entered one of the most transformative periods in its history, the Industrial Revolution. From the 1870s to the early 1900s, the U.S. evolved from a largely agrarian society into the world's leading industrial power. Fueled by technological innovation, abundant natural resources, and a growing labor force, this era reshaped American life and laid the foundation for its rise on the global stage. The Gilded Age and economic boom. This period, often called the Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain to reflect the glittering surface and underlying problems, was marked by rapid economic growth, especially in the North and West. Railroads crisscrossed the country, connecting cities and opening new markets. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, linked the east and west coasts, making it easier to move goods and people. Mass production became the norm. Inventions like the electric light bulb, Thomas Edison, the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and advances in steel and oil processing, thanks to industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, revolutionized industries. Factories grew and cities expanded at unprecedented rates. This economic surge made the U.S. a global industrial leader. By 1900, it produced more steel than any other nation and dominated sectors like oil, textiles, and machinery. Immigration and urbanization. America's industrial boom attracted millions of immigrants from Europe and Asia. Between 1880 and 1920, over 20 million people arrived, seeking better lives and economic opportunity. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh swelled with newcomers, many of whom settled in crowded neighborhoods and took on low-wage jobs in factories, railroads, or construction. Immigrants played a vital role in powering American industry, but they also faced harsh conditions, discrimination, and exploitation. Over time, their presence transformed American culture, introducing new languages, traditions, and religions into the national fabric. Urbanization brought both progress and problems. Skyscrapers, electric trolleys, and modern sewage systems were signs of advancement, but overcrowded slums, poor working conditions, and lack of labor rights led to rising social tensions. Labor movements and social change. As industries grew, so did the gap between the rich and the poor. Workers often labored 12-16 hours a day in dangerous conditions, with little pay or protection. This sparked the rise of labor unions and movements demanding better wages, shorter hours, and safer workplaces. Notable strikes, such as the Haymarket Riot 1886, the Pullman Strike 1894, and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire 1911, brought national attention to the plight of workers. Reformers, journalists called muckrakers, and politicians began pushing for progressive change, leading to regulations on child labor, workplace safety, and fair wages in the early 20th century. America's emergence as a global power. As the U.S. grew stronger economically, it also expanded its influence abroad. The Spanish-American War 1898 marked a turning point as the U.S. defeated Spain and acquired territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, signaling its entry into global imperialism. The country's growing naval power, trade networks, and diplomatic reach positioned it as a rising force. By the early 20th century, America played a central role in international affairs, including World War I 1917 entry, where it helped secure Allied victory and emerged as a dominant global voice. Legacy of industrialization. The industrial age transformed the U.S. into a modern, urban, and capitalist society. It laid the economic and technological foundation for the 20th century's American century, and created a middle class that would drive consumption and culture for decades. But it also brought challenges: income inequality, environmental degradation, and social unrest. Still, this era is remembered as a time when American ambition, innovation, and resilience reshaped the nation and launched it onto the world stage as a rising superpower. While the United States grew into a powerful and prosperous nation in the 20th century, it continued to wrestle with deep inequalities and social divisions, especially around race, gender, and civil liberties. From the early 1900s through the 1960s and beyond, a wave of reform movements emerged to push the country closer to its founding promise of liberty and justice for all. At the heart of this transformation was the civil rights movement, alongside pivotal efforts for women's rights, labor justice, and LGBTQ+ equality. The struggle for racial equality. Though slavery was abolished after the Civil War, African Americans were subjected to nearly a century of segregation, discrimination, and systemic oppression, particularly in the southern states. The post-Reconstruction era gave rise to Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation in schools, public transportation, and even restrooms. Black Americans were also routinely denied the right to vote through literacy tests, poll taxes, and violent intimidation. The fight for racial justice gained major momentum in the 1950s and 1960s. Landmark moments included Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. The Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The Montgomery bus boycott, 1955-56, sparked by Rosa Parks' arrest. This protest led to the desegregation of buses and thrust Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into national prominence. The March on Washington, 1963, over 250,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C., where Dr. King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965. These landmark laws outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and protected voting rights for African Americans. Despite these legal victories, the fight against racism and inequality continued, and still continues today in areas like policing, housing, education, and employment. The women's rights movement. American women played essential roles in every era of U.S. history, yet they were long denied equal rights. The women's suffrage movement, which began in the mid-1800s, finally achieved victory with the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote. In the 1960s and 1970s, a second wave of feminism emerged, led by figures like Betty Friedan and organizations like the National Organization for Women Now. This movement fought for equal pay, access to education, reproductive rights, and an end to gender discrimination in the workplace and beyond. Laws such as Title Roman IX, 1972, helped open doors for women in sports and education. LGBTQ+ rights and visibility. For much of American history, LGBTQ+ individuals were criminalized and marginalized. The turning point came in 1969 with the Stonewall riots in New York City, a spontaneous protest against police raids of gay bars. This event sparked the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement. In the decades that followed, activists pushed for anti-discrimination laws, healthcare access, and marriage equality. A historic moment came in 2015 when the U.S. Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in Obergefell v. Hodges. Latino, Native American, and disability rights movements. Other marginalized groups also organized for justice. Latino Americans, led by activists like Cesar Chavez, fought for farm worker rights, education access, and immigration reform. Native American activists in the 1960s and 70s demanded sovereignty, cultural preservation, and better treatment from the federal government. The disability rights movement led to groundbreaking legislation like the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) of 1990, which prohibits discrimination and promotes accessibility. Legacy and ongoing change. The civil rights and social justice movements of the 20th century fundamentally reshaped American society. They led to sweeping legal changes, shifted public attitudes, and inspired global movements for human rights. Yet, the work is far from over. Issues like racial profiling, gender pay gaps, voting restrictions, and systemic bias remain at the forefront of national conversations. The ongoing struggles underscore a core truth of U.S. history, that progress is driven by people demanding change, and that the fight for equality continues to define the American experience. The U.S. in the modern world. As the 20th century progressed, the United States transitioned from an emerging power into a dominant global superpower. Shaped by the outcomes of two world wars, the Cold War, and rapid technological change, America became a central figure in world affairs economically, politically, culturally, and militarily. Its influence could be felt from diplomatic negotiations and military interventions to music, media, and the Internet. World War II and global leadership. The defining moment for America's rise to global dominance came with World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the U.S. entered the war and played a critical role in defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. By the end of the conflict in 1945, the U.S. stood among the victors, not only with a strong military but also with an intact economy and unmatched industrial output. This victory solidified the United States as a world leader. It helped create and lead major international institutions such as the United Nations (UN), the International Monetary Fund (IMF), and later the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO). Its role in post-war reconstruction, especially through the Marshall Plan, helped rebuild Europe and established America as a global economic powerhouse. The Cold War era, the second half of the 20th century, was shaped by the Cold War, a period of geopolitical tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Though the two superpowers never fought directly, they engaged in proxy wars like those in Korea and Vietnam, arms races, and ideological battles between capitalism and communism. Key moments included the Cuban Missile Crisis 1962, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, the space race culminating in the U.S. landing a man on the moon in 1969, the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which marked the end of the Cold War and left the U.S. as the sole global superpower. Throughout this period, the U.S. projected influence across the world, militarily through alliances and bases, economically through global trade and investment, and culturally through media, film, and consumer goods. 21st century challenges and global impact. In the 21st century, the U.S. continued to play a central role in global affairs, but also faced new challenges. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks led to a dramatic shift in foreign policy, launching the War on Terror and resulting in wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. These conflicts raised questions about U.S. interventionism and its long-term role in global stability. Domestically, the U.S. saw rapid changes due to technology, immigration, and social shifts. The digital revolution, led by American companies like Google, Apple, and Facebook, transformed communication, commerce, and culture worldwide. The U.S. also became a leader in innovation, biotech, and space exploration. However, America also faced political polarization, economic inequality, and growing concerns about climate change, cybersecurity, and public health. Events like the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic revealed both vulnerabilities and resilience in American systems. America's cultural influence beyond politics and economics. American culture has deeply influenced the world. Hollywood movies, jazz, rock, hip-hop, fast food, social media, and blue jeans became global icons. English, bolstered by American media and tech, became the lingua franca of business and international communication. American ideals, such as freedom of speech, democracy, and innovation, have inspired movements around the world, but so too have critiques of its foreign policy, racial inequality, and consumerism. Looking ahead today, the United States remains a global leader, but not without competition. Countries like China and India are rising economically and geopolitically, challenging U.S. dominance in certain areas. Meanwhile, global issues like climate change, artificial intelligence, and pandemics require international cooperation, where America's leadership is both essential and tested. Ultimately, the modern history of the U.S. is a story of transformation and tension between power and responsibility, individual freedom and collective action, and domestic priorities and global influence. How it navigates the future will not only shape its own destiny, but the fate of the world